The number one mistake that most romantasy novels make is that they don't show us the romance developing. That's why today I'm going to tell you exactly how authors like Julia Quinn and Sarah J. Maas show us the romance rather than telling us. And at the end of the video today, I'm going to tell you exactly how you can tell if you're showing or telling in your own writing. So at a basic level, you need to show us what's important and tell us what isn't. The most common mistake that people make where they're telling instead of showing is with emotions. If the characters are arguing, show us how that emotion fills the room. You could demonstrate it by saying his immense power filled up the space, depending on what the character's magic is. Or you could show it in how the main character starts by having a calm facial expression, and then over time maybe she starts shaking her leg or tapping her leg on the floor. Then by the end of the argument, she's actually standing up, raising her arms, and yelling at everybody else in the room. This builds that tension that that character is experiencing so that by the end of the conversation, we are not surprised when she gets angry. In terms of showing attraction specifically, this should start off by initially showing what the character notices. And don't tell us the character noticed this. Instead, tell us about how the character is taking the other person in, what he's noticing, what she's noticing. And then over time, maybe as they start developing a more physical relationship, she might touch his arm or he might put his hand on her cheek. All these little things show us over time that the characters are becoming more attracted to one another without telling us the character is noticing how she's feeling is different than how she initially felt about him. The actions that you build over the course of the story are what sets the stage. Now you also need to keep in mind you don't want to over-describe things. It's very easy to over-describe when you are initially trying to make the transition from telling to showing. So if it helps to paint a picture, the only time you need to over-describe something is if it's important. We don't need to know how he eats his grapes unless he's a freak, because it's important to know if he's a freak. That tells us a lot about his character and what the story might do a little bit later in the novel, if you catch my drift. It's also important to consider what your main character is focusing on, because if your main character is focusing on how he's eating, then that's what the writing should focus on. Your focus on your writing should always follow what your character is looking at and focusing on. Now, when should you actually tell? I know how difficult it can be to find a balance between showing and telling. So a good rule of thumb that you need to follow is that you can show emotions, show character traits, and then just tell us the unnecessary stuff. When you're reading actual books, a lot of times what you see when people are telling you unnecessary bits is either travel or passage of time. In Crescent City, once it gets to, I believe it just calls it Act 2, but at the beginning of the chapter it says 22 months later. So that is the author telling us that time has passed so that we can just get right into the story. We don't have to waste 2 years where nothing really happens. Sometimes there are plot components that you need to tell your reader. For example, in The Duke and I, when we're going through the exposition, it establishes that the reason that Daphne hasn't gotten any proposals is because most of her suitors see her as a friend rather than as a lover. And of course, it's important for us to know that, but it would waste a lot of the reader's time if Julia Quinn had to show this rather than just telling us. Dialogue is actually one of my favorite places when it comes to show, don't tell, because there's so much potential for dialogue. The way that you show in dialogue is that you show us who the character is. So a naive character might ask questions that other characters think are silly, and you can demonstrate this in the interactions that they have with one another. Furthermore, less mature characters are more likely to use simpler language, and I don't just mean this from a standpoint of age, but if you look at the way that Bryce talks in Crescent City, you'll see that she talks like someone who hasn't really grown up. She hasn't gotten into her own, at least not at first. I'm about 140 pages or so into the book, so I'm excited to see if her dialogue actually changes as she comes into her own. You could also use this as a way to create tension between your love interest and the main character, because if the love interest is more mature and the main character is less mature, then that can cause some tension. Maybe he's a little bit more annoyed at her behavior. You see this with Hunt in the Crescent City as well, where he just assumes that she's a rich, spoiled party girl before he's really gotten to know her. And it's really great that she allows us to see Hunt's opinion of Bryce, because it makes it more realistic. Like, oh, you're just a party girl. Now, getting back to dialogue is super important for political intrigue. I know that this is a little bit more nuanced and might be a little bit niche for your novel, but every time you use political intrigue in your story, it usually happens during dialogue. Political intrigue is really complicated. I really don't have enough time to talk about it here. If you're interested in a video all about political intrigue, then please like this video. If I get 5 likes on this video, then I will make a video dedicated to covering everything you need to know about political intrigue. But the key thing you need to know about show don't tell as it relates to political intrigue is that you need to show us what the characters want. Because they're not going to tell us what they want, right? We are having a conversation between someone who has different motives from somebody else. So it's really important that you show us what the primary character wants and what they're trying to get out of it. Or if you're having a scene of political intrigue between your main character and your love interest, then you'll probably want to show us both sides of the picture. This is why I personally think that third-person limited perspective is one of the best perspectives to do romantasy novels in, is because you can easily jump back and forth and show us what each character is thinking. You could also do this with third-person omniscient, but I feel like third-person limited gives us a lot more insight into who the character actually is and lets us know their thoughts. And ultimately, the thing you want to keep in mind most about dialogue as it relates to show don't tell is that this is how you create your unique voice for your character. I have a video all about creating a good character Bible. You can check it out in the link on the screen. And now I just want to give you your keyword. So if you've watched it this far, your keyword is the word scenic. Put it down in the comments below so that I know that you're still watching. Earlier, I mentioned that it's important to find a balance between showing and telling, and now I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into that. Too much showing is annoying and excessive. You see this a lot in older novels. I think the one I'm specifically thinking about is Moby Dick, but you have like pages upon pages upon pages describing all of the food on the table before the characters have even started eating it. They actually make fun of it in Arthur. I don't know if you remember that, but that's just something I remember from when I was a kid. Readers nowadays just don't have that kind of attention span. They're not going to want to read page upon page upon page about a feast. We need to think about what is essential for us to know. What are you trying to show about the characters in the scene, or perhaps the characters who are related to the scene? For example, there's probably someone who is hosting the feast. We need to know what their income level is. And so talking about things like gold silverware and gold plates, oh, they've got this huge pig in the middle of the table with an apple in its mouth, and just really describing the essential details that tell us that they're wealthy, that's what's important for us to know. Now, if you're a newer author, it is okay to feel overwhelmed because showing and not telling is a lot. You could reread some of your favorite books and take notes as you read. Take note of what they're showing, what they're telling, and as you do this, you'll start to notice patterns and you'll be able to implement them more effectively in your writing. I'm already doing this with some of the books that I'm reading, and I'm able to say, oh, this is how my character is weak, and oh, this is how she's making the characters really strong right here. You could take note of the things you don't like, oh, this is kind of annoying or overdone, this is a little cliche, am I doing this in my own novel? It's really important to ask questions so that you can break things down into their smaller components, because that is ultimately how you're going to be able to tell what your writing is doing, and that will help you improve without having to use AI, which we're really big here. So I promised you that I would tell you exactly how you can decide whether or not a scene is showing and not telling, and there are some really easy ways to do that. I just ask myself 3 questions. Am I describing this in less than 6 words? Oftentimes I find when I'm trying to show something and the description is just not working for me, it's usually because it is too short. For example, I had a scene where I described that the room was symmetrical. So I realized, oh, I can show that it's symmetrical rather than just saying this is symmetrical. Another way you can tell is, am I using an adverb? Adverbs are one of the most instinctive ways that we tell rather than show. For example, maybe your heroine has just fallen down and is injured, and you might say he ran over quickly. Rather than saying he ran over quickly, you could say he raced to the rescue. And we know, oh, he's racing over there. He's trying to get over there as fast as he can. And then the last question you can ask yourself is, am I using an emotion word? Emotion words are the biggest place where you're really obviously telling rather than showing. Instead of saying, oh, he looked sad, you can say his eyes were downcast and it took him several moments to respond to things. And those are the foundations of how you can show and not tell. If you want to improve your dialogue and get your readers obsessed with your dialogue scenes, then you need to click on the video on the screen.